Mums and Dads. We are now entering our last study in the book of Acts. Just so you know, this week's Sunday school lesson on Sunday, to be really great if you could focus on the quiz at the end. So there'll be a slightly shorter lesson, and there aren't really that many games or activities that fit too well with the lesson that can be played within a family context. So I'm going to focus mainly on just teaching the lesson. I think there will be an introductory idea, but focusing on the lesson. And then what I thought we could do is we could have a fun end off to the series of Acts, and I will give you some questions for the quiz. You're very welcome to choose whichever quiz style suited you. So I know the Peril Peg game, where they have to pick up things, works well. You can do a Snakes and Ladders challenge. The one that actually worked quite well with my kids was the bomb one, and I'm going to attach a new one for you. And what we actually ended up doing was I printed off the picture of the grid with that had numbers in it, so values and then bombs. But then what we actually did was when I asked the kids the questions for the quiz, they then had a grid in front of them and they had to pick a block. So for those of you that have Discovery Vitality, it's the equivalent of them picking a block, and then Jason actually had the piece of paper with all the details filled in that they couldn't see, and he would reveal to them, okay, you got 50 points, or you got a bomb, or whatever. And then what they did was they each had a cookie, and they filled a different color. And so when they picked a square, they would fill in the number, and then at the end we just added up their points. So that actually worked quite well for us. I just thought I would explain it to you, but feel free to use whatever quiz that you would like to do, just to recap the whole of Acts. And it might be great just to have a little chat with your kids and go, what have we learned about Acts? Isn't it amazing how we've seen, we began with Jesus on earth and then ascending into heaven, and now we have the early church. And it's it's a really great series for us to just explain to our children that the church hasn't always existed, because church is all they've ever known. So you can just go through that with them. But this week we're going to look at Acts chapter 12, and it would be helpful if you could read verse 1 to 24 before listening to the video. So after Saul's conversion, which we see in Acts 9, the church enjoyed a time of peace. You can see that in verse 31 of chapter 9. And the church, it grew, it was strengthened, and this was no doubt in preparation for the opposition that lay ahead. Peter had been firmly established as a very important messenger of Jesus, and now the authorities planned to silence him. All right, let's have a look at a few of the verses. So chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. Herod Agrippa was the grandson of Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the one who tried to kill baby Jesus. Remember you can read in Luke chapter 1, verse 5. Agrippa ruled over Judea from AD 41 to 44, and his sudden death in AD 44 is recorded in Acts chapter 12, verse 21 to 23. So politically, he wanted to maintain friendly relations with the Jewish religious leaders. Persecuting Christians helped him to achieve this, as we see in verse 3. And then also just a feast of unleavened bread is the Passover. So remember when they remembered the Passover in Egypt, where God passed over the houses that had the blood on the doorframe. Then in verse 4, there was a squad of soldiers for each watch period. The watch period was 3 hours. One squad consisted of 4 soldiers, 2 in the cell with Peter, and 2 on guard outside. You can see that in verse 6. Peter had escaped before. Go look at Acts chapter 5, verse 22 to 24, which explains the level of security. Then verse 5, the church continues to look to God for help, knowing that he is in control of all things. Then in verse 6 to 10, the night before his trial, Peter, even though heavily guarded, is miraculously set free. Verse 11, Peter recognizes God's hand in his rescue. You can also see that in chapter 12, verse 17. Then verse 17, James, the half-brother of Jesus, he's now the head of the church, following the execution of James, the brother of John and the son of Zebedee, in chapter 12, verse 2. Then verse 19, it was not unusual for soldiers to be given the punishment due to their escaped prisoners. So Herod would have been very angry to have lost the opportunity to gain further popularity amongst the Jews. Verse 20 to 22, Herod was in a very strong position politically. The enemies were asking for peace, and he had gained great popularity, and he had been elevated to a status of deity, the voice of a god. Then verse 23, but God is sovereign, and he has the final word with regard to Herod, who's been opposing God's people. And then in verse 24, the voice of God is silenced, but the word of the one true God continues to increase and spread. The message about the risen Jesus cannot be stopped, not even by the best efforts of men. It would be good for you, before you teach your kids on Sunday, just to reflect from this passage, how does the early church respond to opposition and probable execution of one of its leaders? Is this your first instinct when you are opposed for your faith? Secondly, think about how is God's sovereignty, his total control, seen in the life of Peter, in the life of Herod, and in the growth of the church. And then perhaps you want to end off just by thinking about how is this passage a challenge and an encouragement to you in terms of your own witness.